Hi, everyone. I see some people are having a little trouble connecting on Zoom. So let's see how that goes. And if you are here, of course, leave me a message, say hello. I'm trying to type here. Hello, everyone. Of course, I missed you last week. I hope you can hear me okay. Yes? Okay. I missed everyone last week. As you know, I wasn't feeling too well, but I'm fine now. And I got lots of great well wishes from all of you. I'd like to thank you for that, for thinking about me. Made me feel much better. Thank you so much. Mr. Q took very good care of me. Oh, good. Everyone can hear me? Excellent. Excellent. See, a couple people are still having a little trouble connecting on Zoom. Here we go. We have everyone connected. Let's see who's here tonight. Oh, all our regulars are here. It's great to see everybody. My back is better. Thank you so much. It was really extremely painful for a couple of days. But thanks to 21st century medicine, I got over it quite quickly. And I did think a little bit about what it would have been like to have been injured like that in the 18th century. And the alternative to this great muscle relaxer that I had that helps that. So I'm sure it was much more excruciating to go through at that time. So I'm grateful to only be pretending to be in the 18th century sometimes. It is better to live in the 21st century. Hi, Marion. It's good to see you. And Hugh tonight from Fredericksburg. So we have some people on YouTube, some people on Zoom, some people on Facebook. Excellent, excellent. Well, it is Women's History Month. So I want to remind everybody who doesn't already have it about my wonderful book, without trying to get out some glare here, about Theodosia Burr. I have too much glare. Let me slant it this way. About Theodosia Burr. I'll hold her up here in front of me because she's much more beautiful than I am. Of course, she's only 18 in this picture, so she's quite beautiful. And behind me, you can see some pages from the book on the table of contents. And one of the pages, about society. It's a wonderful book for any young person who would like to know more about American history, about the founding of our nation, and about an extraordinary young lady, Theodosia Burr Alston, who was growing up quite differently from all of the young ladies around her. And it's a great inspirational story about a young lady who really was definitely swimming upstream at the time. So it's very inspirational. She had very supportive parents. And it is a great book about her very brave and way ahead of their time parents, Aaron and Theodosia Burr. If you would like a copy, don't buy it on Amazon. Buy it from me, please. It's better for me if you buy it from me. And for the same amount as Amazon, I will ship it to you. I will sign it, and I will give you a personal inscription. So if you'd like one, leave me a message on social media. You can always email me at Karen@patriottoursnyc.com and just let me know you'd like a copy, and we'll arrange it. It's $35, includes everything, and I think that might be less than what it is on Amazon Prime right now. So let me know if you'd like one, and I'll be happy to get that to you. And before we start, I just want to go back to a plain background. There we go. It's a little less distracting for our talk this evening. Oh, before I get to that, I just want to let you know that I don't know if some of you were present, but yesterday I spoke for Elon University in North Carolina. I did a 2-hour presentation as Mrs. Q. It went very well, and I was invited back to speak again. So that was great. So thank you all for your support and your encouragement as I get more of these paid speaking engagements. And if you know any organization that would like to have Mrs. Q speak, either via Zoom or live and in person in full costume, please let me know and recommend me, as I really would like to do more in-person speaking engagements. So let me know about that if there's any place you think would like to have Mrs. Q come and speak. Now, those of you who are following me on social media, you know Mrs. Q has a brand new sewing project that I'm going to be working on, a lovely jacket that is very fitted on the top with lots of pleats around it. It's a shorter jacket, comes just past the hips with lots of fancy pleats and things around it. And I will be using this gorgeous blue silk given to me by an old friend of mine, a very old friend of mine. So I will be making the jacket out of this gorgeous blue silk, and the skirt or petticoat will be made out of the white silk I showed you 2 weeks ago. So I think that'll be a nice springy outfit. And you just might see me wearing that on the tour with Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Madison, Mr. Madison. Or I might be wearing stripes. I'm not sure. My sister, Mrs. Van R, tells me stripes are the rage and that I must have stripes. So I haven't decided yet what I'll be wearing. And more information will be out about that tour. We are just pricing it now, and tickets should be on sale next week for that. That's April 30th. 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We haven't decided that either. A walk through New York City on Inauguration Day with Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. You'll learn all about the Federalist Papers. Mrs. Q will be taking the anti-Federalist position on our walk, quoting from many people, including the great Mercy Otis Warren, who wrote a wonderful pamphlet from the anti-Federalist point of view, and also from the point of view of New York Governor George Clinton. So I will be the provocateur on the tour for the two gentlemen, asking them to answer questions and clarify their positions about the Constitution. Speaking of the Constitution, I believe that today, March 4th, is the first day our federal Congress met. I think today is the first day that our government ever operated. I have to check, but I'm pretty sure it was today. So we have that anniversary today. And in a little while, I'll be talking about a big anniversary that we have tomorrow, and that is the Boston Massacre. Give me a second. We have a whole lot of comments here. I just want to take a look at your comments, see if I missed anything. Oh, wow, someone is here from Hawaii. Thank you. I think in my time, I don't know. I wonder what we called Hawaii in the 18th century. I wonder what it was. I don't even know. That would be part of that Pacific shipping route that, as a New Yorker, I would not know very much about. Oh, Mrs. Hagen says, my daughter Victoria graduated from Elon University. Wonderful. It was so nice of them to have me. And I will be speaking again for them, I think, about Theodosia Burr and from Easton, Pennsylvania. Great. Lots of people here with us tonight. So one of the things I would like to talk about is I noticed that in your time, you have a new word that I don't have in my time. You have many words in your time that I don't have in my time, but this one was especially interesting to me. As you know, I study society and politics. Yes, on YouTube. Yes, it was today, March 4th, 1789. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And that word is misinformation. What an interesting word, misinformation. Now, in my time, we have disinformation, which is a falsehood told purposely to mislead people. But in my time, disinformation is very dangerous, as it is easily prosecuted as a libel. In my time, a libel is defined as purposely disseminating a falsehood, knowing it is false. So if you print a falsehood, but you don't know it's false, you're not liable for libel. If you do know it's false, you are. So that would be disinformation, something that is printed purposely to mislead people. And I'll tell you, let's see, an example of that in my time would have been that hilarious proposal that the entire British Empire would fall if we did not buy the East India Tea, which of course everyone knew was a blatant lie or falsehood, but it was still disseminated throughout the colonies anyway, that in order to show our patriotism, we must buy the East India Tea, otherwise the whole British Empire would fall. The East India Tea Company, in your speech, was too big to fail. And that, of course, was a blatant lie. And as far as I know, it was never prosecuted as a libel. Instead, we all laughed at it. Anyway, most of us laughed at it, knowing it was an absurdity. So in that case, the lie was so absurd that no one believed it. Now, there were other types of disinformation we got as well. Consider that the Sons of Liberty were evil and demonic, which is a little bit more, let's say, a little less blatant, because, of course, in my time, people are very religious. And the idea that somebody might be inspired by Satan or be demonic, is something that some people may have believed. But that, of course, was disinformation, as the Sons of Liberty were not demon worshipers or evil or anything like that. But that information was also disseminated at the time to turn us away from the activities of the Sons of Liberty. Mr. Q was in the Sons of Liberty. I assure you, Mr. Q is not a devil worshiper at all. Another one that I just thought of was the Naughty Hellfire Club, run during the Revolutionary War by Major John Andre. His very scandalous parties that he held. There are prints at the time with everyone attending the Hellfire Club, and they are all demons. So another idea that people associated with the Hellfire Club were demons. Obviously not true, but maybe believable to a small part of the public. So that is clearly disinformation, or what we would call a lie or a falsehood. We also had misunderstanding, which would be to, not on purpose, not understand something, that you have not understood the truth of something, but you haven't not understood it purposefully. It's an accidental not understanding. So a misunderstanding. So two people might have a misunderstanding about something. It means they don't understand it the same way, but it's not on purpose. It's just maybe a part of who they are or the way they see the world. So I can see misunderstanding, being misguided. In other words, you're guided in the wrong direction, but not purposefully. So you're misguided, maybe because you haven't understood something well, or you've taken bad advice. So you're misguided. And again, the idea is that this isn't a purposeful direction or a purposeful misleading. This is done by accident. So is misinformation accidental bad information? I don't know. If it's accidental bad information, then it just is kind of, a misunderstanding. Or is it more a new word? Because one doesn't want to use the word disinformation, because to imply that someone has purposefully lied in order to lead people astray may get one into a bit of a legal bind. So for instance, if I said that the printer, Mr. Rivington, was disseminating disinformation, I would be saying that Mr. Rivington was purposefully printing lies in order to lead people in the wrong direction, to confuse them, to make them have the wrong ideas about things. In which case, Mr. Rivington might say, well, Mrs. Q, I'm going to, consult my lawyer because you just accused me of lying. And I'm certainly not lying. So I wouldn't want to say that about Mr. Rivington, because I may make myself open to be sued by him for calling him a liar. And Mr. Rivington might say, well, if I did print something that was incorrect, I was not aware it was incorrect at the time, therefore I'm not liable for it. And Mrs. Q is now lying about me in order to tarnish my reputation. But if I said Mr. Rivington was printing misinformation, there's no legal precedent for misinformation. So I might be able to get away with making my friends think Mr. Rivington is a liar without saying so outright and clearly. So I wonder if that's what your term misinformation really is used for, to indirectly call someone a liar without the legal liability of doing so. So I just would like you to maybe think about that and just consider that in that new term that you have in your time, misinformation. I think that I saw, of course, since Mr. Q is a time traveler, I do have access to some of your documentation in the future. And I think I saw that word came into use or was defined, in the year 2019. So long after me, but certainly it's a rather new term for you. And not that new terms don't come about, because they come about in my time as well, and they enter into our lexicon and our conversation. But I just thought that was a very curious new word. I think we would have loved that in my time, the opportunity to use a word like misinformation against each other. So very useful tool in the toolbox of communication. Let's see, I have a couple. Someone wants to know if Mrs. McGann wants to know if Hawaii were once called the Sandwich Islands. I don't know if anyone knows that. Please let me know, because I'm not sure. Let's see. Congress did meet for the first time today, but adjourned for a lack of a quorum. Yes, they did, Mr. White. And I think that the lack of a quorum was due to New York. Oh my goodness, as New York, as usual, was so busy bickering and arguing over our elections that we didn't get our delegation elected in time to be seated for the first Congress. It's possible that others didn't make it because they were traveling, but really we in New York had absolutely no excuse, as the first federal Congress met in the city of New York. So just another what can I say? Another one of those great moments in the history of my great city of New York being unprepared and not where we're supposed to be because we're too busy arguing amongst ourselves. And by the way, if you come on that April tour, you'll hear all about the way New Yorkers were arguing amongst ourselves over the United States Constitution, and how that arguing, it sometimes almost became violence. So you'll hear a bit about that as well. So we argued quite a bit about that as well. Someone on Facebook says, yes, it was. I assume that means it was New York that kept the Congress from having a quorum. Of course it was, New York, let me remind you, in New York, we held the Stamp Act Congress of 1765, and we in New York refused to ratify or sign the resolves of the Stamp Act Congress. So making that useless. We in New York also would not vote on the Declaration of Independence. I bet you all recall that we were there, but we abstained from every vote respectfully, but we abstained from every vote. So New York also would not ratify the Constitution. Do you recall? We submitted almost, I think Mr. Madison told me, 190 amendments to the Constitution, which he says was our attempt at rewriting the Constitution to suit ourselves. Indeed, I was just speaking to Mr. Madison about this today. So here we have New York finally ratifying the Constitution with the inclusion of the Bill of Rights, settling for 10 amendments of those 190. And then not getting our representatives selected in time to have a quorum when the Congress met. So I don't know, perhaps I can see why the rest of the United States kind of, is frustrated with New York so often. I think this is part of our history that the rest of you will just have to grow accustomed to, just part of our character. So the thing I also wanted to talk about tonight is the great anniversary coming up tomorrow, March 5th, of the Boston Massacre, March 5th of 1770, or let me find this for you, as it was called, the dangers of housing or the dangers of quartering troops among a civilian population. And this is the report of the Boston Massacre that we received here in New York that was printed everywhere. And you see the 4 coffins representing the 4 men who died right there. And a 5th died, I think, a day or 2 later. And this was a result of quartering troops among the civilian population of Boston. If you will remember, we had a great deal of controversy over the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act, which came after the French and Indian War, requiring us to quarter troops here in the American colonies among ourselves and pay for them. And we complained rather loudly that this was dangerous because troops are not civilians and they have weapons. And in the case of many of them, they drank and they got rowdy and they fought and they were troublesome. And so in New York, at least, we passed many restrictions on the behaviors of the troops as a result of the Quartering Act. For instance, especially after this occasion, became very hostile to the troops here. After this occasion, we decided that soldiers could not be out of the barracks after evening roll call. They could never carry a weapon around the town with them. They must be unarmed. And everyone, after the Boston Massacre anyway, who employed soldiers fired them and would not employ them. Many soldiers in the regular army, these are regular British subjects who joined the army for various reasons, many of them because life is better in the army than it is for them in England, worked in New York, worked on farms, worked on docks, assisted artisans, worked in all manner, had second jobs to raise money, and got along with us quite well. After the Boston Massacre, they were all fired from their jobs, as this was an indication on our part that we were no longer tolerating the quartering of troops in our town. So in the case of Boston, let me show you one other picture. This is the one you all know, or you should all know. If you've been on my Revolutionary War tour, you know. This is the famous depiction of the Boston Massacre by the engraver and silversmith Paul Revere, and this is the one we all know. This happens to be an original colored engraving. I would like to say in the collection of Mr. and Mrs. Q, but in reality, it's in the New York Historical Society. If it was in the collection of Mr. and Mrs. Q, well, we would certainly have some great investment for our retirement if we had one of these. But this is in the collection of the New York Historical Society, and it is disinformation or propaganda, isn't it? It shows the British troops lined up, getting an order from their captain here to fire upon unarmed men on the other side of the street. And there's a little dog here. And this is not how the Boston Massacre happened, but it is the way Mr. Revere presented it, and it is the way we all believed it happened in the colonies. So this is disinformation meant to create a false view of an event in everyone's mind. And this is what we all thought happened, that the British soldiers lined up and under command of their captain, they picked up their weapons and they shot into a group of Sons of Liberty. We all know, though, from the trial that isn't what happened. And you might know who represented these soldiers in the trial. It was the great John Adams. So I ask you, would a great patriot like John Adams represent the soldiers if this is what happened? Of course not. The story of what happened in the Boston Massacre was very different. And that is that the soldiers were regulars. They were young, very young. Some of them just teenage boys, very young boys. And they were terrified at the drunken mob across the street, the drunken mob of Sons of Liberty, who, no offense meant to any of my friends in Boston, because I really am saluting Boston tonight, but we do have to tell the truth sometimes. And that is that of all of the Sons of Liberty, everyone knows that the worst, the most violent, the most drunken were the ones in Boston. Our New York Sons of Liberty, I must say, at times were bad enough in their activities, but the Boston Sons of Liberty took that to a whole new level with their antics in Boston. And they were quite drunk, and they were throwing bricks and rocks and objects at these very young, no experienced British soldiers. And you know, this picture makes it look like the British soldiers are all in these nice, clean red uniforms. They're all dressed the same. They all look so well fed and well taken care of. And that really was not the case of regular soldiers. Some of them were very young, and their uniforms were old and torn. They were dirty, filthy. You know, they didn't have access to taking a bath or keeping themselves clean. They didn't have the same life as a British officer would have had. So some of these boys were really unkempt. They were not well fed. They were not fed the way the officers were. They were inexperienced, and they were really scared to death. They were frightened. At no time did the commanding officer give an order to shoot. But out of fear, one of the young men fired and the others fired as well, killing the four men in the Sons of Liberty. And someone on Facebook from, I think this is from Mrs. Q's Facebook group, says Samuel Adams was the ringleader. Indeed, he was. And isn't that interesting that Samuel Adams was the ringleader over here, while his cousin was defending the guys over here? So it tells you that there was not uniformity of thought in the Adams family. And in the future, don't joke at the Adams family line. Mr. Q laughs about that all the time, the Adams family. I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about this one. So there was not uniformity of thought among the Adams men, clearly, as there was not uniformity of thought among many families here in New York at the time either. So this is really a brilliant piece of work on the part of Paul Revere to turn all of the people of the colonies against the quartered troops in their towns. And after this, the attitude toward our troops changed drastically throughout the colonies. So we would say that this was a very successful piece of propaganda or disinformation issued by Mr. Paul Revere. And I think, you know, even in your time, there are many people who still believe it happened this way, that this is what happened, but it is not what happened. And I think many of the soldiers that John Adams represented were found not guilty, and some of them were found guilty of lesser charges. The captain certainly was found not guilty of giving the order to fire, which was the most important charge of the event. So we do celebrate the people of Boston on March 5th, and the fact that they unfortunately were the first victims of the bad idea to quarter troops among civilians in the colonies, and that this was a very bad idea, a very bad plan on the part of the British. It is unfortunate that our brothers and sisters in Boston had to be the first to pay the penalty for it, but it was their sacrifice that led to changes in the other colonial cities. So we honor and salute them for their terrible losses on that day. Mr. Linden tells me 2 were convicted of manslaughter. Yes, so that would have been unwillingly killing those men, and punished by branding. I haven't talked about that, how branding is a very popular punishment in my time, being branded for your crimes. I think one night I'll just talk about punishments for crimes. I know in your time, you can take a very long time to try someone, and they can spend a very long time in jail. In my time, we can't afford that. We don't have those big taxes like you have, and we don't have enough tax revenue to keep people in jail for a very long time. So we like our legal process to move much more quickly. So a person is charged, they may be out on bail, they have their trial, they are convicted, and their punishment is carried out within a couple of days. So we like to move people through the legal system quickly because we simply don't have the money to keep people in jail for years and years and years. So unlike you, we do execute people for a great number of crimes rather than keep them housed in jail. We also do brand people for their crimes. And of course, if you're branded, you carry the knowledge of that crime. Everyone knows you've committed that crime for the rest of your life. So that would be a rather serious crime. And for other things, we may put you in the stocks overnight, you know, the stocks with your head in your arms, and people will come by and jeer at you and maybe throw some garbage or things at you. It's a very humiliating experience. And there is a story here in New York of a man who was in the stocks, and his wife sitting there all night with him crying and, you know, wiping his face as people were throwing things at him. So very sad. We also put people in stuff. Oh, the pillory, people get whipped for their crimes, for more serious crimes. People are whipped and whipped, branded, and executed are most of the crimes. Fined as well. So some smaller crimes have a fine associated with them, so you might be fined. My mother was a big proponent of making her daughters watch executions when we were girls. Mrs. Van R. and I were brought off with our mother and father to the town square when punishments were carried out, so that we saw people in the stocks, we saw people whipped, we saw people branded, and we saw people hanged. And this was our mother's way of instilling in us a fear of breaking the law. So very terrible. I have not chosen to attend executions, neither has my sister, but you, of course, Mr. Q and Mr. Van are, you know, those two gentlemen. Do I have to tell you more? I think you've learned quite a bit about those two gentlemen in our weeks together. I find it quite amusing to go to an execution. Those two gentlemen, using the term gentleman loosely to describe them, or as Mrs. Van R calls them, two farmers, even though they're not really farmers, but you get the idea of what she's trying to get across. Our husbands being a bit rougher than we are. So let me see. Let me look at. Oh, Mrs. Gast got here. Hello, it's good to see you tonight. And punished by branding, yes. And so I'm trying to see your comments here, if there are any other comments. So I wonder if any of you would like to make any comments about my comments on misinformation. I see Mrs. Healy is laughing. On Zoom, Mrs. Healy and I are often, Mrs. Healy ought to be my third sister, as she and Mrs. Van R and I are often in agreement on many topics. So she ought to be our third sister in some ways. So she would be suited very well to our time, I think. And I see someone is on Zoom, and I think that's a picture of Federal Hall they're using, which is very nice, since this is the day the Congress met at Federal Hall without a quorum because of New York. Or if you have anything you would like, any comments you'd like to make about the Boston Massacre. It was an enormous event. It changed life in the colonies for all of us who had troops quartered with us. It took our relationship with the troops that was, we could say, tense at that time, and turned it into an openly hostile relationship. You might know that this occurred about 5 weeks after our Golden Hill, which was a massive riot between our soldiers and the men of our town. No one was killed in Golden Hill, but it still was an escalation of those bad feelings to the point of violence. And we see this coming to greater violence in Boston. And as I said, because of the sacrifice of the people in Boston, nothing like this happened in another city, as we all then began to separate ourselves from the troops that were based here. So it's still 5 years before the Revolutionary War. So keep that in mind. It takes us a very long time to get from the Boston Massacre to the Revolutionary War. 5 long years of struggle. I have a question. Did England change the law and do away with quartering because of the Boston Massacre? No chance. Of course not. Well, those our betters in England just knew that this was just an anomaly, as they called it. Of course, they completely blamed the people of Boston for what happened that night. It was all, the rogues in Boston or the rascals in Boston. It was all their fault of a drunken mob, and not the fault of their troops at all. That is not the way they saw it. Remember, they did not see the Boston Tea Party as a type of protest or an outcry against their refusal to hear our complaints. They saw that as a brutal act of rebellion against the Parliament, when it was really just an action protesting against the excesses and the lies of the East India Company. So the Parliament interpreted that as I'm going to say an attack on Parliament, because the members of Parliament were all corrupt. Well, many were corrupt, weren't they? And in their seats because of the kind donations of the East India Company, also known as bribes, we might say. Of course, I can now because we're free of England, so I can say outright that they were bribes. So many people in the Parliament saw themselves as an extension of the East India Company, and thus the attack on the East India Company was an attack on Parliament and the Crown themselves. So we did not see things the same way at all. is it unusual for the people to not see things the same as the people who govern over them? So we will be talking. One night I will be doing, in a couple of weeks, I think, a Mrs. Q live on a different night with Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Madison for you. And one of the things you might want to ask them is how they anticipated that one day the people in the government may become disconnected from the people, as the parliament was in our time. And did they make a provision to prevent that from happening? Or do they believe they made a provision to prevent them from happening? And is it even possible to prevent that from happening? Or is it inevitable that all governments eventually become disconnected from the people whom they govern, and that eventually the people will overthrow that government and institute a new one? Is this just a cyclical process that happens in all governments? You might want to ask Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Madison about that on the night we're together. And certainly if you come on the tour, you'll want to ask them. If you come on the tour, at the end of the tour, these are people who attend in person, we will have an unlimited question and answer period with the two gentlemen, and you'll be able to ask them any of the questions you have, and of course take pictures and things like that. But for people who come on the tour in person, an extended period at the end of the tour for you to speak with Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Madison, and they will be ready to take your questions. I'm sure, I certainly hope they are. I think they'll be well prepared for your questions. And you may want to bring, if you have a constitution, maybe you'd like to bring it and have them sign it for you. It'd be fun to have Madison and Hamilton sign your constitution if you have a copy. So Mrs. Q will sign it too, but I'm quite irrelevant to the Constitution, as I didn't write it. I didn't ratify it. Maybe I just debated a little bit about it, or maybe talk to Mr. Q about what he thought about it, which wasn't much, but Mr. Q being an anti-federalist himself. But we'll talk about that another time as we get closer to that tour. So do any of you have any questions or comments? If you saw that picture I posted of that lovely French woman with her big hair and her lovely white dress and her long ponytails, this is what I'm working towards. So I think I need one or two more of these in the back. I did happen to misplace two of these. I'm not sure how I did it. How does one misplace two hair extensions that are this long? But I did manage to misplace them. So I'm actively looking for them so that I can add a couple more. She had four, I think, two shorter ones in the front and two very long ones down the back. I think I have the top of her hair done pretty well. So I just need to add the extensions. And I see someone is joining us on Zoom. An old supporter is joining on Zoom. I'd like to say hi to Mrs. Davidian, who's just joining us as we're getting ready to say goodnight. But it's good to see you from Texas. I don't know what Texas is yet, but Mrs. McCabe thinks my hair looks great. This has become my favorite wig now. I think this one does look great, and will look really wonderful in that, I think, blue jacket and the white skirt, because those are time period correct to the hair. And I think they'll be very nice with my big blue silk hat on there. Maybe I'll put a nice big feather in it as well. So I'll be very 1789 appropriate. Mrs. Van R, I'm sure, will help me. Of course, Mrs. Van R will outdress me that day. She will be with us that day as well. And I'm sure she will outdress me, as she is always dressed in the finest couture imaginable, as she has the time and the money to do so. Mrs. Davidian says she had a Lenten Zoom. Very nice, very nice. And I hear Mr. Q is just coming home. So maybe he'll walk in. Maybe I can get Mr. Q to say hello. Should I try to get Mr. Q to say hello? Mr. Q, do you want to say hello? Say hello.
Hello.
There's Mr. Q. And you do know that if you come on that April 30th tour, you will meet Mr. Q. He will be there. The 21st century Mr. Q. So thanks all of you for joining me tonight. I hope you had some fun thinking a little bit about misinformation. And remember tomorrow on March 5th to honor the people of Boston and their great sacrifice in the Boston Massacre, a sacrifice that changed the direction of American history. So a great day, March 5th, 1770. Thank you all for joining me, and I will see you next week. Thank you very, very much.